It's great to have Ambassador Sujan Chinoy here, Your Excellency Sujan Chinoy, as I must be formal here, and all of you lovely people here. Once again, because we had a book launch a couple of years back, and he's a prolific writer, and we hope we'll keep repeating this year after year. This is done jointly by the Rajkumar College's Old Arcasians Association, known as ORA in short, ORA. And we have both the presidents with us today, the president of the committee of the Rajkumar College, His Highness Mandata Singh of Rajkot, as well as Yogesh Vadhwana, who is the president of ORA. And of course, Shravan Godiawala Sahib, who is the president of AMA. So that's a good trio. About RKC, on the 5th January 2025, we are going to celebrate the Aura Day in Rajkot by felicitating all our ex-teachers from all over India, wherever they are, even if they are abroad, we need to call them and pay respect because they built us. Whatever we are is because. And Sujan's mother was also one of our teachers. So it is a great thing. We also have a vibrant Aura business network where we invite industry experts to guide and mentor our members. And I'm sure there are a lot of industry experts here. So just giving you a hint that you may be called upon sometime. May I invite the President, Mr. Shravan Godiawala, for the welcome address.
Thank you, sir. Ambassador Chinoy, sir, ladies and gentlemen, such a pleasure to have you. I would use the word again today for the book launch. I do remember and it feels nostalgic when I was introducing at that time also the world upside down. And I was lucky, I would say, to have that book couple of days in advance, and I sent a picture also. I saw the book at the airport in Delhi, and then I could go through, and then I was even more excited when I was introducing. Unfortunately, today I do not have this book, so I told our executive director. So, sir, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, we call him His Excellency Ambassador Sujan Chinoy is our family for AMA. We have been always privileged to have him quite many times, and then for such important events also that we have had him. We have his guidance also, and certainly with Mukesh Bhai, we have even more close association with Ambassador Chinoy sir, purely the Japan Connect also, and we thankful, we are grateful to you, sir. Today, of course, we are very excited in India as a pole star. Everybody is excited to know about this, that how and what is happening in the tumultuous global economy, the several issues happening in the West, and then, of course, who knows, something in the East is also about to come up, and several things again in the East which are, quite, we would say, a concern for the world at large. So, sir, very happy, of course, to have you again, and very happy to have AMA as the platform for this event today, and thank you so much. I will pass on the baton to Amit Bhai to introduce sir, and then take the event forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Savan Bhai. Good afternoon, everybody. Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, members of AMA, fellow Arcasians, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to introduce Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, a distinguished alumnus of the Rajkumar College and a true luminary in the field of international diplomacy today. I've been lucky to have known Sujan Bhai since our school days, going back to 1973-74. He credits RKCR School for playing a pivotal role in shaping his early years. The school's emphasis on academic excellence, coupled with his vibrant extracurricular activities, ignited his passion for learning and exploration. His strong leaning towards public service was evident early in his career. He passed up the opportunity of joining the NDA, the National Defense Academy, to pursue a career in foreign policy. This was, I think, 1977, if I'm right. He is a proud son of Gujarat. Sujanbai's formative years were deeply influenced by his parents and grandfather. He is grandson of barrister C.N. Chinoy, the Diwan of erstwhile Rajkot state, and son of Sri Ramesh Bhai and Srimati Ushaben Chinoy. His father was an IPS officer and mother a devoted teacher who was at RKC, and I happened to be my class teacher in grade 3. The Chinoy's love for art, culture, and emphasis on discipline instilled in him a strong foundation for his future endeavors. He is a man of exceptional linguistic abilities. He is fluent in English, Chinese, Mandarin, conversant in French, Spanish, German, Japanese, Arabic, Urdu, and French Creole. His proficiency in multiple languages has been instrumental in his diplomatic career. In addition to his intellectual pursuits, Ambassador Chinoy is an accomplished sportsman too. He's an excellent rifle shot and a skilled tent pegging enthusiast. Tent pegging is a precision sport on horseback, where a galloping horse, you have a spear in your hand and you unplug a small peg from the ground. His athletic progress reflects his discipline and competitive spirit. Today, Ambassador Chinoy is a renowned figure in the diplomatic world. With a career spanning over 3 decades, his expertise in East and Southeast Asian affairs is unparalleled in New Delhi today. He currently serves as the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, a prestigious think tank based out of New Delhi. He was also the chair of the Think 20 engagement group during the India's G20 presidency. Thank you. Before joining the think tank, Ambassador Chinoy served as a career diplomat from 1981 to 2018. He held key diplomatic positions such as India's ambassador to Mexico and Japan, Consul General in Shanghai and Sydney, India's representative to the First Committee at the United Nations. The list kind of goes on. His deep understanding of China, East Asia, and their politico-military issues have been invaluable to India's foreign policy. Ambassador Chinoy has been appointed to the distinguished 9-member committee tasked with transforming the DRDO. This strategic move, initiated by Prime Minister Modi, aims to modernize India's defense research and development capabilities. Ambassador Chinoy's exceptional contributions to India's diplomatic landscape and his ongoing commitment to public service make him a true inspiration to us all amongst RKC old students and the Foreign Service at large. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present to you Ambassador Sujan Chinoy. May I please invite you on stage? Please. I'll invite Mr. Sawan Godiawala and Mr. Yogesh Wadwana to present a small memento to Sujan Bhai. No? Yes, please be seated. No, please be seated. Now, a couple of old Arcasians in Kamlesh Bhai and Devang Mehta, they've been very kind and gracious to have created a video. It's a 5-minute video that talks about the book, why Sujan Bhai has written this book, and it'll give us a background of the book. So please, may I have the screening, please? The title of the video is Global Tumult, India as a Pole Star, Unveiling India's Role as a Beacon of Stability, a Journey with Sujan Chinoy.
Welcome to the launch of Sujan Chinoy's groundbreaking new book, Global Tumult, India as a Pole Star, released by Rupa Publications. The world stands on the edge, torn by sharp ideological divides, territorial conflicts, military aggression, and the weaponization of trade and technology. Peace and stability are in jeopardy. A gridlocked, multilateral order hampers post-pandemic recovery, climate action, and green transitions. Yet, even in this storm, a beacon of hope shines through. In the Indo-Pacific, a powerful shift is underway. As nations push back against regional hegemonism and champion resilient supply chains and unfettered developmental finance, new alliances are forged, promising a brighter future. India steps forward with resolve and vision. Its triumphant G20 presidency, inspired by the ancient ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, exemplifies an ethical, values-driven path for humanity. Emerging as the fastest-growing large economy, India is on the brink of greatness. The dream of Viksit Bharat, a developed India, by 2047 is within reach. Central to this vision are Surakshit Bharat, a secure and militarily resilient nation, and Atmanirbhar Bharat, a self-reliant powerhouse. Sujan Chinoy, Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses, MP IDSA, and chair of the Think 20 engagement group for India's G20 presidency, meticulously chronicles these pivotal times in global tumult, India as a pole star. With unrivaled insight, he explores India's foreign and defense strategies and its monumental achievements. Chinoy unveils a riveting narrative of India's rise, offering a profound understanding of how this nation is shaping global order and securing a prosperous future for humanity. This essential read for global affairs enthusiasts, defense strategists, and anyone intrigued by India's role on the world stage is now available at leading bookstores and online platforms. Sujan Chinoy, a diplomat with more than 4 decades of experience in defense, security, and international relations, has held pivotal roles, including ambassador to Japan and Mexico, an expert on China, East Asia, and politico-military issues. He led critical negotiations on the India-China border. Fluent in Mandarin and conversant in multiple languages, Chinoy brings unparalleled expertise to his work. He is also the author of World Upside Down. India Recalibrates, its geopolitics, and co-editor of several key titles on India's foreign policy. The world needs India to captain team democracy. Hence, the key statement in this fine book is that India's strategic autonomy is not necessarily linked to non-alignment. In other words, India can keep its independence while still taking sides. Sujan Chinoy's book outlines India's foreign policy as an exercise in maximizing strategic autonomy amidst global uncertainty. It should be mandatory reading for policymakers and practitioners seeking to strategize engagement with a country that is forging its destiny as pole star and taking its rightful seat at the head table. India is emerging at a moment when the world is buffeted by wars and contestations around territory, trade, technology, and materials. In Global Tumult, India as a pole star, Sujan Chinoy offers insights of a practitioner scholar into the country's journey as it reclaims its authenticity as Bharat. And why does India matter?
Look, India is the one country in the world today with a great deal of credibility. It has credibility because it is a country that is looking to build a values-based future for humanity through the vision of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. India is also now increasingly a voice for the global South.
Join us in celebrating this extraordinary exploration of our turbulent world and the promise of a luminous future with India as a guiding star. In a world on the brink, this is a story that demands to be read. Discover the forces shaping our future and the role India will play. Global Tumult, India as a pole star, your guide to understanding the new global order. Get your copy today and be a part of the conversation that will shape tomorrow.
That was a very interesting video. It's very well combined and gave a lot of insight into how things go geopolitically. May I now invite His Excellency Ambassador Sujan Chinoy to give the address, please.
A senior and prefect from school has just warned me that it's 20 minutes, no more. So if I wish to avoid punishment, I should stick to my 20 minutes. But let me begin, first of all, by wishing you all a very good evening and acknowledging the presence of the president of the ORA, Shri Yogesh Wadhwana, president of the Ahmedabad Management Association, Dr. Savan Godiawala. I want to especially acknowledge the presence of Thakur Sahib Shri Mandata Singh Ji of Rajkot, who is also the president of the Board of Trustees of my alma mater, that is the Rajkumar College in Rajkot. I want to also acknowledge the presence of Shri Rajiv Gandhi, MD, Hester Biosciences, and for all that he does to facilitate our work, our common work in Ahmedabad. Shri Mukesh Bhai Patel, who is the honorary consul now of Japan in Gujarat, a past president of AMA and also the president of the India-Japan Friendship Association, with which I am associated for many years. And Shri Devang Mehta in particular, that self-effacing young man there, who's actually instrumental in having prepared that wonderful video, which is better than what I'm about to present to you. I haven't really omitted anyone else, but I have to thank Punja Bapu Wala. That's the way you write your name now. But otherwise, I would have called him Shri Punjawala of Mandawad, as I knew him as my senior in school. But thank you very much for those generous words. And Shri Amit Shukla for his very warm and generous words right at the beginning. He has been one of the mainstays, along with others, particularly Shri Rajiv Gandhi, in organizing this function today. So my grateful thanks to them, and also to my college mates and other colleagues who have turned up in considerable numbers to support their schoolmates, so to speak. Now, let me begin by saying, why did I write this book? It's obvious because since I wrote that book last year, World Upside Down, India recalibrates its geopolitics, the world still remains upside down. So I thought it was time to carry that narrative further and write a sequel to that book. And that is how I came upon the idea of writing a book titled Global Tumult, India as a Pole Star. And I particularly take delight in telling you that for both these books, I also designed the cover page. It's most unnatural for an author to want to do that, but I spent a great deal of time, and eventually the publishers had to give me credit at the back of the book for designing the cover page. So the cover page is entirely mine, and therefore this defeats the logic that is inherent in the English saying that do not judge a book by its cover. In this case, please judge the book by its cover. I also approached a number of my friends for endorsements, because endorsements are important at every stage of life, and they give you some encouragement as well to do well. So I approached Mr. Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister of Australia, who's a good friend. And I did this because last year I'd approached another good friend, Mr. Kevin Rudd, who was also a Prime Minister once of Australia. I also asked Mr. Jose Antonio Meade Curibreña, the Foreign Minister of Mexico when I was ambassador there. He's still a very good friend. And they've all actually been very generous in their remarks, along with Dr. Samir Saran, President of the ORF. And I do feel that I have to live up to those expectations as well. I do hope that the contents of the book live up to the very, very sort of deep praise that they have heaped on me. When I was seeking blurbs, I was astonished by a rejection that I received. I had approached an American scholar and requested that scholar, I will neither reveal the name nor the gender to disallow anyone from guessing, but the person said, I cannot give you a blurb for this book, though I do believe that we are good friends and I respect you for your work. And the reason given to me revealed to me a certain mindset that still prevails around the world. The book has a chapter on India's rise, and I have linked it to the Vedanta philosophy of there being the Brahman as the fountainhead, the Godhead, and there being the Atman in terms of the various countries around the world, and how this great synergy exists between the Atman and the Brahman, and how it is an expression that unites everybody, and particularly India, that has always had the philosophy of the past, its great civilizational heritage of not only Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but also concepts of Swarajya, as in a certain amount of independence and strategic autonomy that today is very much evident in India's foreign policy, and what Gandhiji had termed as Sarvodaya, which is upliftment of one and all, leaving no one behind. But the objectionable part for this Westerner was the fact that I was placing India as a pole star, and that I was emphasizing India's great civilizational legacy, its strategic autonomy, its ability to speak as a voice for the global south. And ladies and gentlemen, this is something that's new. It is also something that is seen often as disruptive by the vested interests that have always had a privileged global structure crafted and curated in their favor for the past 8 decades. So you can see that India's rise as a pole star is going to meet with a lot of opposition in the future if this is the manner in which scholars and strategic thinkers, especially in the West, see India trying to place itself as a pole star as something that is out of place. Whereas for us, it's a natural corollary of our great civilizational heritage and all that we stand for today, particularly at a time when the world is in a great deal of uncertainty. There is a great deal of major power contestation. There is increasingly a drift towards multipolarity. And the only known structure that is available to us, that is the United Nations, and particularly its apex decision-making body, that is the UN Security Council, set up way back in 1945 to maintain peace, stability, and progress around the world is failing to achieve that end. It is failing in its duty, and it is less efficient than ever before. It is something that stands eroded and unable to deal with the complex set and web of issues and challenges that have manifested themselves in recent years. And it is in this great era of uncertainty, situation of flux, where India is emerging as one of the independent poles. There are a number of middle powers today, and India is often counted among them as a middle power. But I, for one, in my book have also stated that I find it hard to describe and define a middle power. Because middle powers, like the great powers, are basically on a spectrum. And there are a large number of middle powers, but not everybody is in the same category in terms of either GDP or military power or population or any other vector on which you would judge comprehensive national power. For that matter, it is very difficult to define any country today as a great power. If the definition were membership of the UN Security Council, possessing permanent membership there, possessing a veto power, possessing nuclear weapons, yet there is a complexity attached to it, because today we find that India has overtaken the United Kingdom, for instance, as the 5th largest economy in the world. So on GDP alone, India stands ahead of certain permanent members of the Security Council. And not just the United Kingdom, but also, for example, the Russian Federation. If it is, for example, nuclear weapons, then India also has nuclear weapons. Not that nuclear weapons were necessary in 1945 to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council, because only one country had demonstrated availability and use of nuclear weapons, and that was the United States of America. Others, for example, like the Russian Federation, then of course the Soviet Union, acquired nuclear weapons in 1949. Later, France in 1960, the UK in between in 1952, China in 1964, and India in 1974. So the attributes that are required today for being described as either a great power or a middle power are fluid. Middle powers are sometimes capable of being described as great powers, and great powers today, many of them stand diminished and may easily belong to the category of lesser powers. But that is the situation today, where the one structure that is considered legal remains unchanged, and from that flows your identity, the permanent membership of the Security Council. It is in this context that India today has not only emerged as a very large and important economy, one of the largest emerging economies with the fastest growth rate, but it is also a country that has increasingly demonstrated its ability for exercising a strategic autonomy. In Nehru's time, for example, we had non-aligned status, but for me, non-alignment meant a certain degree of detachment and disengagement from the politics of the great powers. To me, strategic autonomy of the type that India exercises today, it's not about detachment, it's not about disengagement. It is about more engagement, but in a strategically independent manner, where your sovereign choices are not decided in other capitals. And it leaves India scope and elbow room and latitude to also engage in multi-alignment or issue-based alignment with other powers. So the definition today of strategic autonomy is for the greater good of this country, unlike some policies of the past. Everywhere that we see today in all geographies, there are critical factors that are causing a great deal of friction. We, for instance, are increasingly witnessing contradictions and friction in trade, and trade is being weaponized. We also see in a globalized world attempts being made to erode the flow of technology, as in regimes that aim to control exports, regimes that sanction other countries in regard to technology, the denial of technology, the emergence of denial regimes for technology are in fact part of the weaponization that we see today in a period of globalization or somewhat challenged globalization. We also see that there are territorial contests all over the world. There is no geography today that is free of territorial contest. These have come up because of the UN Security Council's inability to keep the lid on the problem. And we have seen this, for example, in our geography, in the emergence and rise of China, not only as a very big economic power, but increasingly a very large militarized power that has tendencies to spill over into other peripheral regions, if not across the world. We've also seen how there are differences with regard to terrorism. Terrorism is innately bad for global peace, stability, and progress, and the world should be increasingly united on terrorism, but its inability to do so arises from strategic partnerships and considerations where certain countries believe that there are good terrorists and bad terrorists. And we have seen a situation where a large power like China, for example, puts technical holds and prevents the listing of terrorists at the United Nations simply because it has a strategic partnership with Pakistan, especially when it comes to the Lashkar-e-Toiba and the JEM, Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists that have been identified by the international community. Beyond that, we have differences with regard to tenets and narratives. The normative part of the world structure is changing today very rapidly. No longer is it possible for countries to agree that the United Nations Charter, which is full of good principles for maintaining peace, stability, and progress, is sufficient. That itself is being challenged by member states as each interprets its own interests in a different manner. And so therefore the world has descended into what we call a classic struggle between open, democratic, liberal countries and centralized, authoritarian, often communist regimes, and we see this kind of a clash that's taking place in the normative space today. And that makes it a very difficult choice for other countries that have very close ties with not only the United States and countries of Europe, but also China and Russia and others on the other side of the fence. Now, in our neighborhood, I think it's very important to emphasize that India, to rise as a major power, requires peace and stability on its periphery. That's a no-brainer, because without peace and stability, it is virtually impossible to focus on internal, what we call economic growth, social justice, and such other processes. And we have seen how, in recent years, the neighborhood also stands challenged for India. One of the primary causes for disruption in South Asia is, in fact, its own history. The fact that India came into its own in 1947 and that its birth coincided with, in fact, the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, but with a very different system, very different philosophy, very different ideology. And the British, when they left India, had left us with frontiers, not necessarily all clear-cut borders. For the British had believed all along in maintaining buffer states, in playing the great game, in keeping Tsarist Russia out of Tibet, Xinjiang, and parts of Central Asia. And it was the British that encouraged China to actually step into empty spaces such as Xinjiang and Tibet in order to keep the Russians out. And when both countries came into their own, one of the first contradictions was their search for national identity based on geography. So that tells us that geography is very important, borders are very important, and national identity is based on that. And that is why India must also protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity with the same robust responses that it is giving today to any challenge to this particular concept. China's rise is a matter of great concern for India on two counts. Firstly, it is a direct neighbor of India with an unresolved boundary that runs into thousands of kilometers, but more so because it is often inimical to India's rise. Its system is diametrically opposite and different to that of India. And sometimes I feel that in India's success lies a greater questioning of the system that the Chinese have followed so far. It is also a matter of considerable concern that China's economic rise has resulted into a militarization of that power, a certain amount of unilateralism in terms of its application, and the spillover that I referred to in our part of the world, in South Asia, where it is not a natural power, and its presence in the Indian Ocean also is a matter of concern. The larger dilemma today is how to manage relations with China. The Chinese have taken a position that after Galwan, 4 years after Galwan, we now have relative peace and stability in the border areas, and we should therefore normalize the rest of the relationship. India's position is that unless and until we are able to disengage at the remaining friction points on the boundary, and we are able to maintain and guarantee peace and stability, we cannot pretend that we have a very normal relationship in the rest of our engagement. But of course, all of you and people like me will have to continue to think about the level of economic engagement that should be permitted or could be permitted between the world's second largest economy, that is China, and a rising economy like India. I believe that there is every reason to look very carefully at critical supply chains and ensure that these are not compromised, that we do not end up with dependencies on a certain geography, as has happened in the case of many economies, including the United States, until they woke up and began to take certain remedial measures. But at the same time, we may have to see and study what kind of impact a complete disengagement would result on our own goals and objectives of creating an Atmanirbhar Bharat, and particularly the area in which SMEs and MSMEs work. Some of their supply chains are and continue to be linked to China. Our G20 presidency, friends, was an astonishing success, for it was the first time that a country made it a national program involving 1.4 billion people, convening more than 200 large events across the country, and also ensuring not only the fullest participation from both within and outside the country, but also ensuring that the African Union, 55-member African Union, came in and became part of this grouping. It emphasizes that we stand for democracy, openness, inclusivity, and the fact that we would like a much better level playing field in terms of the decision making today in the world. In many ways, I would say this is India's kintsugi moment. Kintsugi, as you know, in Japan is the art of using gold to mend broken things like porcelain and things like that. And in that craft also is a great beauty of putting fractured pieces together. It has its own value. So I would say that India stands at a kintsugi moment today because it is that gold thread. It is that gold which can actually seal the fractures within the global community today. And I say this because it has demonstrated its ability to point the world towards a values-based future, a future that is not based simply on the binary choices that are being offered by contesting camps, such as the West, for example, or the Russia, China, Russia, I should say, combined. And we, therefore, are eminently positioned today to share with the rest of the world our own unique experience. For example, that of the unified payments infrastructure system that we have in India, the Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and smartphones, the JAM Trinity. We are also capable of pointing the world to a new direction in regard to climate change through what Prime Minister Modi had described as lifestyle for the environment, where each individual becomes responsible for the damage that's being caused ceaselessly to the environment, to the air that we breathe and the water that we drink, and our forests are being denuded, and so making each person an important player. That also, to me, resonates with the Kartavya Kal that has been declared between now and between 2022 and 2047 when we want to achieve a Viksit Bharat. And apart from that, we also want to achieve a Surakshit Bharat. For you cannot really be a Viksit Bharat without having a Surakshit Bharat, and vice versa. We have also contributed with regard to clean energy by being the only country that has met its Paris climate agreement goals before any other. So the green transition that is underway in India, the emphasis on hydrogen, green hydrogen and other things is something that we can share with the rest of the world. And the initiatives that we have taken with regard to the International Solar Alliance or the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or even infrastructure for island states that we have promoted, this shows that India is capable of standing at the forefront of the global south as a voice, as a genuine voice and representative of the developing countries, to see if we can take this process of what we call economic recovery post-COVID-19 pandemic. The rebooting of the global economy is something in which India will play a big role. I think when we speak of rebooting the global economy, we are reminded of the importance of the UN's 2030 agenda, which is for sustainable development goals. The SDG program, all 17 SDGs are extremely important. And increasingly, I see that India is merging its own goals and objectives in the context of what is required to be done for the global community in terms of the SDGs. And this is very important, and I relate this once again to the Vedanta concept of Brahman and Atman, because India is also relating itself to the fountainhead of what is required for the global community, not just acting as an individual entity. We are following the principles today of Karma Yogi. We are neither Rajsik in the true, what we call Arthashastra sense, because when I was looking at that mandala concept of Arthashastra, Kautilya's Arthashastra, it struck me that one of the key requirements for a nation's rise is to seek domination of the neighbor. And that is what we call realpolitik. But I think India has also tweaked that a little bit. It is not seeking domination of neighboring kingdoms in order to facilitate its rise. So therefore, it is not truly a Rajsik kind of concept where self-interest is supreme. It is also not a Tamasic concept of passivity and negativity. It is, in fact, what we call a Sattvic approach to creating a new and responsible emerging global order. I believe that our role, which I have outlined among other things as a Vishwamitra or a Vishwabandhu, is extremely important because we have demonstrated that capacity of selflessness. Whether it is during the COVID-19 pandemic when we gave millions of vaccines to countries around the world, or whether it is in terms of meeting humanitarian assistance and disaster relief challenges in our region. When it comes to these challenges, it is always India that is out there to help at times of natural disasters, such as the earthquake in Nepal or the water crisis through Operation Neer. We helped the Maldives. After the great tsunami of 2004, again, it was India that had helped countries of Southeast Asia and South Asia. But today, one of the most important tasks before us is also to ensure, as I said before, a Surakshit Bharat. And a Surakshit Bharat requires adequate funding for our armed forces, and above all, adequate structures and processes. It's not just funding that will help us, but also structures and processes. And therefore, I feel that the defense reforms that we have carried out so far in terms of the creation of the Office of the Chief of Defense Staff, General Anil Chauhan is the current incumbent. You saw me handing over a copy of my book to him. The creation of the Department of Military Affairs, the fact that we are now working on the basis of what we call positive indigenization lists, which ban the armed forces of India from buying more than 5,000 items from abroad. They must procure them locally. The capital acquisitions budget of the Ministry of Defense, of the defense budget, is increasingly being diverted towards local procurement. It has gone up from 40% to 75%. 25% of the defense research budget is to be reserved for the private sector. So these are huge changes that are taking place. We are also emphasizing what we call Atmanirbharta in defense manufacturing, and to export more than ever before. India never exported defense items in the past, but today, in order to ensure that these critical supply chains are available to us, we are also building a very large defense industry in India. From the INS Vikrant, our aircraft carrier, to, for example, the Tejas Mark 1, Mark 1A, Mark 2 fighter aircraft, to the main battle tanks that we are building. We are capable of building a very large array of systems in India. And the private sector, for the first time, the big DPSUs and the private sector have emerged as big players. So I think this is likely to continue. I want to end by mentioning a few other things. That India always stands for peace and non-violence. That's been a central thought in India's civilizational history. The reconciliation of differences through peaceful dialogue, coexistence, integration. But between violence and cowardly flight, Gandhiji himself said that I can only prefer violence to cowardice. The fact of the matter is that while India stands for peace, and while India stands for the resolution of disputes through peaceful negotiations, we must keep our powder dry. We must be prepared for any eventuality in a world full of such uncertainty and emerging challenges. And if the great apostle of peace, Mahatma Gandhi himself could say that, then we must appreciate the importance of keeping our powder dry. The world is the great gymnasium where we come to make ourselves strong. And so said Swami Vivekananda, no less. So it is therefore with vigor that we must engage the world. The world is full of challenges. It is full of powers. Some are friendly, some are inimical to our interests. We may not always be able to control the situation, but we must be prepared for that. And if we are to prepare ourselves for the emerging challenges of the 21st century, it requires strength. Strength will come primarily from economic power. It will come from our social cohesion, our ability to work seamlessly as a team. And therefore, we must treat the world, the global stage, as that great gymnasium in which everyone is coming out, turning out to make themselves strong. It's a competitive world. And we must be prepared for that competition. We must continue to maintain zero tolerance, as this government has done, for terrorism. For terrorism is a very big threat. It's a real threat, with the fountainhead of terrorism in our neighborhood in Pakistan. Pakistan continues to use terrorism as part of its diplomatic toolkit to deal with us. And we must continue to emphasize the importance of the Indo-Pacific, which is a much wider geography involving a larger number of people, of many more countries, as compared to the more limited concept of the Asia-Pacific, in which a certain privileged geography in East Asia benefited during half a century, from the end of the Second World War till the end of the 20th century. There will be new wars tomorrow, and day after, and the day after that, and we'll have to be prepared for these, because these are going to be wars that are obviously based on the runaway progress that technologies have made. So high technology will be at the heart of these wars. Many of these wars will be hybrid wars. There will be gray zone conflict. It will be a kind of conflict that also involves alliances between states and non-state actors. As we have seen in the case of Pakistan, the deep state acting in tandem with terrorists to wage a long-term below the threshold war against India. We've also seen how technology is being used in different ways. There are absolute gaps in power today between nations, and that asymmetry in absolute military power is also being bridged with technology, as we have seen in the case of garage-made rockets and missiles used by Hamas to mount and challenge the formidable defenses of Israel. So drones are here to stay. Artificial intelligence will make them even more complex, and we will enter the future in terms of what we call lethal autonomous weapons systems, where Everything will be based on beyond visual range, weapons that can hit at longer distances, and also a world in which the shooter, sensor connectivity is being, the chain is, the kill chain as we call it, the sensor to shooter kill chain is being made shorter and shorter. Whoever has mastery of, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, who has the capacity to put data together from various, satellites and land-based sensors and information sources, whoever has the ability to integrate data, whoever has the ability to press the button first will emerge the winner. So we have to be ready for that also. And I am also urging private players to take a leaf out of the book of Elon Musk. For today's wars, we see the emergence of private players. We have seen how Elon Musk, for example, SpaceX has offered Starlink battlefield satellite, framework to the Ukrainians to wage battle in spaces where there is no internet. So here you are seeing the emergence of the private player in wars of tomorrow. We have seen how, private players can actually also influence public opinion. The emergence of a transnational community today around the world is a matter of concern to me. So long as a transnational community that straddles various countries, geographies, and nationalities is focused on the larger good of humanity, dealing with climate change, dealing with deforestation, dealing with pandemics, dealing with green transitions, dealing with digital public infrastructure, I think it is a good thing to have a global community. But if that same global community is inimical to core national interests, it is undermining government's efforts, it uses social media for disinformation or mounting intelligence and cognitive operations, then that is a threat to national security. With these few words, I want to once again thank you all for coming here and listening patiently. I'm not sure if I exceeded my time, but I'm ready to take the punishment, as we did back in school, writing the front page of an entire newspaper within the next 2 hours, or taking 10 rounds of the quadrangle, or standing out there in the hot sun. But I'm deeply grateful to you for having turned up to listen patiently to all that has been said today by others and myself. And I do hope you'll get a copy of the book. It'll obviously encourage me to keep writing as well. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Before I invite some of you for the book launch, I just want to relate an incident. I think Amit said he's been in the Foreign Service for 3 decades. I think it's 4, because in '84, when I was in Hong Kong, and I rang up the embassy that I want to speak to Mr. Sujan Chinoy. And the lady there said, I'm sorry, sir, he's not here. So suddenly I was backfoot. I mean, I'd heard that Sujan had got into the Foreign Service, and we were he was posted in Hong Kong and things like that. Then I said, what is the reason? Why is he not here? He said, no, he goes to the university to learn Chinese. So that was his job then, because we needed experts on China. And this man's foresight at that time, see, IFS is all about glamour, and you want to get a posting in Europe and one of these fancy countries. He chose China, knowing that China is going to be very important in future. I mean, that is his foresight decades ago. So I congratulate you for that.
And thanks for the correction. On the 28th of August, I just began my 44th year in public service without a break.
Yeah. And another thing I'm going to, inspired by him, I'm going to write a book on regional tumult. Since he mentioned Soros, and he's a diplomat, so he's got to, cover his words and all. I'm not. હું તો કાઠિયાવાડી છું, આપણે ધડબડ આડે કુવાડે જ ફેંકવાનું. There is a lot of talk going about American deep state and how they got the ex-CM of PM of Pakistan, the cricketer, out. Okay, because he was playing ball with China and Russia also, both. He wanted all. More recently, you have seen another neighbor, this lady, also being thrown out because she, I think, I may be wrong, please correct me. She didn't play ball because they wanted some air base or something like that. And it is said that we may be in line also with all these Shine Bagh and farmers' protests and all that crap and all. So these are just my views. I'm sorry I digressed a bit. Now, may I call upon stage Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, Mr. Shavan Gudiyawala Sahib, the President, the Vice President, Yogesh Vadwana, President of ORA, Mr. Mukesh Patel, Amit Shukla, Thakur Sahib Mandada Singh, and myself. I'm already here. Self-invited. There'll be a short question answer session now in case some of you have some. This is between Mr. Rajiv Gandhi and Sujan Chinoy. Later, if very short, for very short time. Thank you.
Mr. Chinoy, sir, can I ask my question?
After this session gets over, then we will do it. So, thank you, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, for taking out time and coming over here. The book launch, of course, we were all awaiting for that, and we all, most of us over here, remember last year when we had the first book launch over here, and here we are again today. Hearing you has always been a treat, and you have been so articulate and clear that a lot anyway is learnt in whatever words that you say. But nonetheless, there are always questions, and sometimes it also makes our mind think and ask a few questions or think. Let me start with the G20. Now, you were the chair for the Think 20, which actually organized and got through to the whole G20. So how was this process done, and how differently did we do than the earlier G20s? Because this G20 by far was the most elaborate and the most known G20 ever.
I think one of the biggest differences was that until India took on the G20 presidency, no other country had made it a people's movement. No other country had involved all its people. And in India's case, we had a year-long G20 presidency in which an effort was consciously made to involve all the people of India across all states. So when I spoke about the 200 plus events, these were held across the length and the breadth of the country. And it was an opportunity to showcase India to the rest of the world, to showcase India's products to the rest of the world, because there was also this concept of one district, one product. And in the process, we also renewed some of our infrastructure, promoted our tourism, our cuisine, and allowed parts of India that had never engaged the world to engage the world. I would say, in a sense, by inviting the world to India, we were also preparing the world for tomorrow's India, the India of the 21st century. And that introduction early on is very important. It also gave great confidence to people across the country that they could take on the world. They could engage the world as equals.
So with the G20 becoming so prominent as what we made sure that it becomes extremely prominent, the next question is G20 versus the United Nations. Are we headed towards, in a way, making United Nations not relevant, irrelevant rather, more so at a time when the United Nations Security Council, where 60% of the global GDP providing countries are not represented? I read that in your book. So are we really headed towards that? It may not be a deliberate attempt, but everybody would want to go that way, because ultimately the whole world order is changing from what it was in 1945, 1947. And if we still take that as a baseline, as what you mentioned in your speech as well as in your book, where are we headed towards?
So essentially, let's first discuss the context. The existing global order has not changed. It remains the same. The problem is that it is unable today to reflect or accommodate the changes over the last 80 years in the balance of power and the redistribution of particularly economic strength, and in many cases the realities of military power that have taken place since then. So the structure remains the same, but it is no longer befitting and appropriate for our times. That structure represented by the United Nations remains very hardcore privileged and unwilling to change because of the unwillingness of the 5 permanent members to give up any part of their privileged power. In that broad context, when we find that the UN structure is not responding to the challenges of the time, we have also seen a movement towards greater emphasis on bilateral relations or trilateral or even what we call plurilateral and minilateral networks of relationships with like-minded partners. So there is a drift across the world to engage with those that think like you and share your values. But that to me also suggests a certain degree of polarization, because when you get into bilateral, trilateral and minilateral groups, you also have a large number of them not necessarily working as a whole. Now, the G20 is one of those structures. It originally was a G7 structure, which had been made into, for a while, a G8 structure with the inclusion of the Russian Federation until 2014, when Russia went into Crimea. Russia was removed from the G8 structure. It went back to being a G7 structure. The G7 had realized, all economic powers, that after the 2 global financial and economic crises, which ended in 2007 and 8, that it needed to engage the others in this large world of ours, especially the emerging economies. And therefore, the structure was expanded to make it a dialogue mechanism, what is now known as the G20. Now, the G20 has certain unique advantages because all 5 permanent members of the Security Council are members. All G7 nations are members. All the BRICS nations before the expansion, before 5 other countries were added, all the BRICS are also part of the G20. And even IBSA, that is to say India, Brazil, and South Africa, that regional structure. One might even say that if we look at RIC, which is the original Russia, India, China structure that was proposed in the late 1990s by former foreign minister and former prime minister, the late Mr. Primakov of Russia, That is also present in the G20. I would say, therefore, that the G20 is an ideal team that is today available for consultations. How is it different from the UN Security Council? It's different because the UN Security Council has certain powers, privileged powers, that are not available to the G20. The G20 decisions are not enforceable. They are not necessarily measures available to them which are punitive in nature. It is more of a consultative process. But when you look at the inability of the world to decide anything much anywhere else, this is apparently the largest such group available to you, which still seems to be functioning. And so we have to make use of it. If you're looking at, for example, a clogged, heavy traffic highway with traffic jams on it, I would say that's the highway of the United Nations and the UN Security Council. And if you look at, for example, a wayside station where you can get into a service road and, get into a wayside station and have a coffee with friends, etc., that's the G20. So the G20 allows you to get out of the quagmire of major power contestation, this kind of impasse that you have in global decision making, and allows you to brainstorm on the larger issues. But also, the other big difference is that the G20 is primarily for economic issues. It is not meant to discuss issues of peace, war and peace. And there is a tendency on the part of the G7 to bring those extraneous issues into the G20, which others obviously must resist. We must move the focus back to the requirements of Africa or the developing countries, the countries of the South that need much greater hybrid finance today for their own economic requirements, for connectivity, for infrastructure, for rejuvenating economic growth. So that's where, again, India can play that kind of role as a voice of the global South.
Recently, our Prime Minister visited Ukraine and Poland. Of course, Ukraine was a historic visit that he made. And every Indian citizen feels, and many people even in the world, that if at all somebody can try to get a solution, it could be our Prime Minister to the current things that are happening between Ukraine, Russia. So what are your views on this thing, and how long is this going to go? Because both of them claim victory on a particular day, and then the next day somebody else is being bombed, and then it just goes on and on and on. Where are we headed towards that?
Look, the second part first. As I mentioned in my remarks, this is an era now of protracted wars. Wars do not end very easily because they are complex today, and absolute gaps in national power these gaps are bridged through asymmetrical means, through non-traditional means, which even smaller states and non-state actors today have access to asymmetrical means to bridge absolute gaps in power. I gave you the example of the Hamas, for example, fighting Israel, which is one of the world's most potent military powers, and they did so by making rockets in their garage, which cost next to nothing, or using drones with single grenades to drop some ordnance on sophisticated watchtowers which the Israelis have. We've also seen, for example, the Houthis in the Red Sea using various types of missiles and drones to conduct a certain type of hybrid war on shipping, especially shipping that is associated with the West, which is seen as supporting Israel in the war in Gaza. So this war between Ukraine and Russia is unlikely to end anytime soon. The other problem here is that I do not believe it is a war between two parties. It is also a proxy war in which many others are directly or indirectly involved. Many other capitals are involved. The foreign policy of a number of other countries is playing into this war in terms of what is acceptable and what is not. or what should either side be convinced to do or desist from doing. So we have a very complex situation there. Now, when you speak about mediation or a mediator, the first principle is that a mediator must receive an invitation from both warring or feuding parties. The second most important and critical principle is that the mediator must have absolute credibility as being neutral. A mediator cannot be seen as siding with one or the other of the two parties. Now, if the requirement of some countries in the world today in looking at India as a potential mediator is that such a mediator should play the role of a mediator but side with one of the two parties more than with the other, then that defeats the very purpose of mediation. So, to my mind, it is a complex call. And the Prime Minister has not said that India, will play a mediation role. He has never said that. I would imagine that India potentially can play a mediation role, provided these conditions are met. But one of the most complex issues that will come as a roadblock is that a mediator must also have the freedom to suggest changes in behavior and in positions. And if this is not acceptable to capitals that are involved in the proxy war, where the real reins of control lie, how can you have a settlement? So I think it can be done in theory. In practice, it would be very difficult for any mediator.
Thank you for your elaborate answer, sir. Coming to India now, we are on a mode of Atmanirbharta, self-sufficient, etc. But we always see China, and there are certain needs which are always seeming to be unfulfilled if without the help, I would not say the help, without an economic trade with China. So how much is China's relevance to our Atmanirbhar objective?
So first I would say that the word I would use for Atmanirbhar Bharat is a greater dose of self-reliance, not necessarily self-sufficiency. I draw a distinction between self-reliance and self-sufficiency. A self-reliance is a matter of degree. Self-sufficiency, to my mind, suggests something more absolute on the same spectrum. Now, I don't think it's India's intention, nor is it necessary for India to go in for a policy of self-sufficiency, which really would tantamount to a closed-door policy, which would mean less engagement of the outside world. Whereas what we are seeking is more engagement of the outside world, especially on technology, especially on trade, especially in terms of TOT, manufacturing in India, etc. So what we are looking at is an Atmanirbharta in which we use self-reliance to a higher degree in order to move up the value chain in terms of manufacturing, in terms of R&D, in terms of certain supply chains and their creation in India, such that we would become more competitive at the global level, which then suggests that there is great deal of space there to actually engage the rest of the world. So that having been said, as far as China is concerned, the core issue is that as China's economy grew, it was also very clear that it was still and is very much a state-led economy. They allowed a certain degree of decentralization at the provincial level. But beyond that, they also had a macroeconomic policy that was very tightly controlled at the central government level. China also encouraged its provinces to create a great deal of capacity in everything. And you see those capacities earlier in power and telecom, in cement and in steel. And now you will see it also in the extraordinary amounts of solar panels that they produce today, which is much more than what the entire world can consume, even if you give it for free. Such is the production capacity of China. A similar story is being played out in terms of EVs and batteries, etc. So really what has happened is that all of China, within China, is competing one with the other. There are excess capacities, and China looks to selling all that to the rest of the world. There's a certain degree of subsidy involved. There's a certain degree of sort of monopolistic tendency there, and the ability to capture markets is immense. Now, the other feature of China's economy is that China has always sought access to global markets. In fact, that's the secret of its growth, primarily flowing from its access to that one big market in the United States of America, but also many other markets in the European Union, Japan, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere, as far away as Latin America and Africa. And in doing so, China is also showing a degree of unwillingness to offer reciprocal access to its own market. So it is extremely protective about its own markets, and it is extremely demanding when it comes to access to the markets of others. And that is a situation which is also true of China's economic partnership with India. That's why we have $135 billion of trade with China, even after Galwan, even after the bloodshed there. And in that we find that we have, exports of about, say, 18 to 19 billion dollars, and the rest is all, in China's favor. The issue here is that when we speak to the Chinese and say, why don't you buy more from us, the Chinese also counter us with a question, that how much more of agricultural produce or raw materials or commodities can we buy, or semi-finished goods can we buy, how much of leather, how much of handicrafts, how much of textiles can we buy from India. Now, that should give you a signal that they are also speaking about the structural nature and characteristics of the Indian economy when it comes to engaging China. The Chinese say that these differences and China's favorable balance of trade is the result of structural differences. They deny that this has anything to do with policy. They say that there is nothing by way of policy that China has decided to prevent Indian goods from coming. But if you don't have those goods that China's economy needs, then how much more of the commodities can we buy from you? And even if we buy these commodities, they are largely high volume, low cost stuff like iron ore and things like that. As against that, China sells you a great deal of finished products in a comparative manner of much higher value. So this is where we are. Now, within this, I would say that we have to be discerning. We have to dissect the supply chains. If the supply chains are linked to, for example, my 21st century telecom program, in which semiconductors are involved, in which I'm looking at AI, I'm looking at 5G, 6G, then the effort is to keep any Chinese technology out, because we have seen that it must be addressed with a certain degree of caution. But if it comes to more simpler stuff on which depend a large number of SMEs and MSMEs, then that is not the import that you can or should restrict. In any case, you can't, because trade is not conducted by the Ministry of Defense or the Ministry of External Affairs. It's conducted by Mr. Rajiv Gandhi and Mr. Yogesh Wadhwana, and trade is fungible. Trade is therefore out there. It is a reflection of your economic requirements. And therefore, I think many of our sectors will continue to rely on a lot of stuff from China, including the pharma sector, which still continues to buy a great deal of active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs and all that come from China. And that's only the tip of the iceberg.
This just makes me think, sir, that if doing business with China sometimes could help a country to get many things because of the costs and all, our neighboring country on the west, Pakistan, they are so much aligned with China, but still they are just not able to do anything. Now, so it's more of a political will probably of the Pakistan system, which is not allowing them to do things, because now they have a direct road, they have a rail track all the way to Karachi to feed all across, but still they are not able to do things with China. So in a way, probably it's not that anybody well aligned with China is definitely going to be getting things at some cheap price or getting everything. It's a thought that is coming in my mind.
I do believe that China's relationship with Pakistan is actually a strategic relationship. It is a relationship in which China's looking to use Pakistan for its own ends. It is not a relationship in which China is simply willing to give Pakistan whatever it needs. So in fact, there's a limit to how much China is willing to give Pakistan also. The China-Pakistan economic corridor, for example, is viewed by many Pakistanis in Pakistan as exploitative, as not being financially viable, as being weighed heavily in favor of Chinese suppliers for all the power plants, coal power plants, and the other infrastructure that they are building, port facilities in Karachi, anywhere else along the China-Pakistan economic corridor. But when you look at Pakistan and its inability to have an economic dividend, the way India is now capitalizing on its economic dividend, I think the core issue is not political will. I think the core issue is a very cancerous vision that the Pakistani elite have, particularly the armed forces, the army, about waging perennially some kind of a war against a neighbor like India. And particularly focusing on using asymmetrical means like terrorism to bridge the absolute gap that now is increasing between Pakistan and India. As we look into the rear view mirror, Pakistan is fading away into the background more and more. But when you look at the past 30 years ago, you would know that Pakistan's growth rates were much better, and they kind of took pride in having a better performance than India as well. But today the place is coming apart because the emphasis is on jihad, on terrorism, on radicalization, and the deep state's tendency, the army's tendency to look at all this as strategic assets, to be nurtured, maintained, to wage a certain kind of war against neighbors. Whether it is India or a neighbor like Afghanistan, everybody feels that blowback from what is happening within Pakistan. And so I think Pakistan has to live on doles largely, on bailouts, and you will see often the state reaching out to either the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia or running all the way to the IMF to secure certain loans. But I think they've had the devil's luck also in the past, that every time they reached such a moment of reckoning for their economy, there have been tumultuous events in the region which kind of suddenly gave them a shot in the arm, whether it was the Soviets moving into Afghanistan or, for example, 9/11, which suddenly made Pakistan very important to US war on international terrorism and so on and so forth. But I think it cannot last forever. That kind of nebulous luck cannot last forever. There's got to be something more concrete. And I think wise Pakistanis, educated Pakistanis, both understand this problem and are frustrated by it as well. But may I just add here that in India's rise, in fact, there should be logically a great deal of opportunity for all neighbors to rise as well. For India can be that veritable rising tide that lifts all boats in the region, theoretically, provided the neighboring countries, and here I'm referring to Pakistan in particular, are willing to take that opportunity. Because intra-South Asian trade is abysmally poor. It's less than 5%. And in other parts of the world, whether you look at Southeast Asia, East Asia, even South America, Mercosur area, you find that regional integration is of a much higher order. Now, I sometimes worry about the fact that any country's rise also requires a certain regional consensus. So how is India going to work to build that regional consensus in its favor, which works to the advancement of its goal of further rise?
In fact, I was just to ask you the last question, and most of it you already answered regarding the countries, our neighboring countries, and what is how can India actually further its relationship, whether it is trade, whether it is diplomacy, political equation with our neighbors, because that in itself can give a lot of confidence in one hand and a lot of peace also. If you are peaceful with your neighbors, it's always easier overall. So I think with this just last question, if you could just give a little insight that how India can actually get things better for itself with its neighbors like Myanmar, Bangladesh, Maldives, Nepal. I think we can leave Pakistan out because you anyway enumerated it well. Of course, Afghanistan is not a direct neighbor, but our relationship with Afghanistan.
In legal terms, it is.
Yes, it is there. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
In practical
Yes, we don't have a direct access physically, but we have improved our relationship with Afghanistan relatively to quite a few other places, as it appears. So if you could just give some insights that, and after that we will take a few questions.
So India has always looked at. Is this working? Yeah. India has always tried to be the first port of call for regional countries in distress, in economic distress as well. And we've seen one very recent example 3 years ago when Sri Lanka went through an enormous economic crisis. It is India that stepped up to offer $4 billion plus worth of assistance to Sri Lanka. And we've done that whenever possible for other neighbors. We have lines of credit for each of our South Asian neighbors. We have lines of credit for procuring defense equipment also for each of our neighbors. With Nepal, for example, we are sourcing a large amount of power from them, which adds to their own economic well-being. India can act as a corridor for surplus power from Nepal to Bangladesh. Likewise, from Bhutan, we are purchasing a large amount of power. And we are doing our best in terms of offering our market. We have done it in the past through things like South Asia, free trade agreement and the South Asia preferential trade agreement, offering zero tariff, lines in our market for goods from our neighboring countries. But here the problem is that they must have an economy that goes beyond simply producing rice or offering tourism, as was the case in Sri Lanka, or going beyond simply tourism, as is the case with the Maldives. Nepal, again, has a very poor manufacturing base, and others are also in various shades of distress. So Bangladesh, of course, is one singular example where the textile industry outdid what was being done in India. Microfinancing was another example. So the issue is that the economic performance of India so far, our experience, and those of our experience of our neighbors has not kept abreast. And that creates, again, structural issues for cooperation. Now, I want to relate this to China's economic circumstances. In China's case, when China started out on its reforms and modernization, it was actually surrounded by economies on its immediate periphery that were actually far more advanced than China. And so you had, for example, Taiwan there, a Republic of Korea there, you had Singapore, you had Hong Kong, you had other parts of Southeast Asia. And there was one more advantage, that beyond being more advanced economies, and I'm not even speaking here of a kind of trading neighbor like United States or a very large economy like Japan that was also heavily invested in China. But there was also a very large diaspora, Chinese diaspora, available in these economies and also controlling economic levers of power in those economies, whether it was Malaysia or Singapore or even Hong Kong, Taiwan. This is the Chinese, overseas Chinese that came first to China with a lot of trust and confidence. Now in our case, we cannot see any such similarity. We have a neighborhood that is far behind us, not ahead of us. We have a neighborhood in which we cannot say that there is an Indian diaspora with great economic power available in advanced economies on our periphery. And so I think there is a historical difference in terms of our experience and the Chinese experience.
Thank you, Ambassador Chinoy. Your answers have always been so exhaustive that it gives a very detailed perspective of anything that is asked to you. With this, I'd like to open it to the House for questions. Yes, Savan Bhai.
Sir, extremely insightful. Of course, the question, that one question I was to ask you, answered the UN Security Council and India. But what I wanted to ask was, you mentioned that India has taken a stance, or India has grown in a fashion which is neither Rajasic or a Tamasic. It is more Sattvic. We are not dominating kind of. Versus China, which has been Rajasic. We are seeing that they have always been grown, and they have grown well. We have to accept the fact they have grown fast also. How comfortable the world is, they are stabilizing it, destabilizing. So whether there's a philosophy of that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or is it a strategy that India has grown in the fashion that it has? And the second question, part of it, that we talk about a Viksit Bharat, and you did mention without a Surakshit Bharat, there cannot be a Viksit Bharat, and vice versa. But then we look at GDP at 5 trillion, and then the third largest economy to become sooner, and then Viksit by 2047. Where is our per capita? We're not going to be a fourth of US per capita in next 75 years. This is the IMF report last month. So are we in sync that whether that Viksit is going to serve the purpose so far as all the strata of the economy and the people around are concerned? So that would be my question, sir.
So I would say that in terms of an approach to economic growth, I still prefer the path of least resistance. And if you take a page out of the Chinese experience, you'll see that their growth is one of the most amazing phenomena of the 20th and 21st centuries in terms of its transition from a developing country to now being the world's second largest economy in a telescoped time frame of 3 to 4 decades, pulling out large numbers of people, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and achieving a GDP per capita now of about $12,500 US, whereas in 1950 and even in 1980, their GDP and their per capita GDP were fundamentally the same as that of India. In the year 2000, their per capita GDP, per capita GDP was only twice that of India. By 2010, it had become 4 times that of India, and by 2018-19, it had become 6 times that of India. But they've also had to pay a price for that mercantilism, for that certain amount of brazen aggression, that they show towards capturing markets, offering subsidies, debt trap diplomacy, not caring for the environment. So it's not sustainable presence that they have in any part of the world, as now increasingly seen by host countries, whether it's Africa or Latin America. There's a certain amount of rethink about falling into the clutches of, for example, China's financial assistance and things like that, because that's seen as a certain kind of debt, which is very distressful for economies when they cannot service those debts, and then they lose a certain amount of sovereignty over their assets also. We've seen it in the case of Sri Lanka, for example, the Hambantota port. So I would imagine that India's model is a better model, that you look at the ability to move forward with a certain amount of consensus about what you are doing and a certain amount of acceptability. So that's the first part. The second part is about our own GDP growth rate. Now, if you look at the road that we have traveled, then it is fairly laudatory in terms of having emerged now as one of the fastest growing economies. But the key challenge is to keep up this growth for a sustained period. I mean, a minimum period of 20 years is required for this kind of high growth rate, and we should try to hit double digit also. Even China had a phase of double digit growth. It may never go back to that, halcyon period when it had double digit growth rate, but we must aspire to do that too. Now, I don't think the fact that we have 1.4 billion people and that we are growing at a certain rate, which is a matter of fact, we cannot magically alter the per capita part. But what can be done is to enhance economic growth rates, enhance redistribution and social justice, and make it better than what it was yesterday. So we can also live with the feeling that we will not hit that middle income trap so soon. And this labor cost arbitrage that we might still be able to offer in manufacturing for the next 10, 20 years will remain an advantage to the Indian economy. It's no longer available to the Chinese. But then the Chinese are also moving away from traditional manufacturing. Just as Japan moved away and passed on certain industries to its neighbors, China is also doing the same today. And it's moving into focus on very high-end technologies and AI and EV and green transitions and things like that. But we'll have to cut our coat according to our cloth. No magical solution there about per capita GDP.
Yeah. Vimal.
Ambassador, lovely listening to you. The question here is, as we keep on sharpening our saws and improving our economy and our global position in the global order in terms of economy, moral strength, political strength, etc., what are your views on the forces that are getting together to, erode India from within, exploiting our domestic fault lines, in the sense that, if you look at the citizenship, in accelerated citizenship for minorities, the US has similar laws for Jews, but yet that is not highlighted, but India is being pushed down for it. We have energy purchase from Russia for which we have been beaten down for the last year or so. USA continues purchase of uranium from Russia, $1 billion annually despite the war going on. Europe continues to purchase gas, but that's all below the rug. And at the same issues, India is being beaten down on the global scale to a point where globally the image is created that the US, or rather India, is fueling the Russian war. And similarly, unfortunately, the non-cooperative opposition, and every country desperately needs a strong but a constructive opposition. And despite that, our opposition keeps on insisting on caste census and this and that and all that, essentially exploiting the fault lines. Your views on that, sir?
So I don't think having an opposition in a democracy is by itself a problem. And frankly, that's for me not the issue. I will not go into the politics of it, but let me say that I draw your attention to what I had said, perhaps insufficiently in my remarks, that I welcome the emergence of a transnational community that transcends national identity, that transcends the color of your ID card or the color of your passport, one that works on larger issues confronting humanity, such as, for example, climate change, etc. But I do not welcome the emergence of a global community that primary purpose of which is to erode your strategic autonomy and to also collude in order to erode your national goals and objectives and to question your traditions, your constitution, your way of life, etc. So it's a double-edged sword. This emergence as a result of globalization, this great connectivity that we now have where geography is no longer an impediment. The tyranny of geography is not there because of technology, because of IT, the internet. And that global connectivity plays both ways. In certain areas it's helpful, in certain areas it is extremely poisonous and detrimental. Our effort should be to keep it limited to the positives. When it becomes negative, it starts corroding your system. As far as Russian oil is concerned, I mean, I was in Japan speaking at an event, and a speaker from Ukraine raised the same issue as to why is India buying such a lot of oil from Russia. And I had to point out that I was speaking in a country, Japan, that is a member of the G7. It is a country that stands for peace and non-violence, known for that, and has taken a very strong stand on Russia's war in Ukraine, and yet was buying, as I spoke there, I pointed out that Japan buys roughly 9.5% of its natural gas and continues to do so from Russia. Now, what's good for the goose is equally good for the gander. You cannot have double standards there. You cannot say that we have a commitment that is a legacy commitment to buy Russian, natural gas, and it's an important part of our economy. If we don't buy, Russian gas, then we will have to buy from elsewhere, and that will then put stress on supply chains of natural gas elsewhere and raise prices for the rest of the world. If they can say that, then India as a developing country has every right to seek the best possible and cheapest sources of oil in a fungible competitive market to fuel its own economic growth. And so we have continued to do that. And I think the government of India has also said that if we stop buying Russian oil, we'll have to get it from somewhere else. That means we will offtake oil from the oil market from which many others are buying, which means there will be a rush for that oil, and you'll spike up demand there, and that will result in higher prices for other buyers as well. So I don't see the logic here of not buying Russian oil or gas when many others are buying it. So it's not India that's responsible for fueling the war, or it is not as a result of India's buying Russian oil that Russia's foreign policy is conducted in either Ukraine or in Crimea. These things have been going on for decades. So it's too simplistic an argument. It's also an argument that borders on missionary zeal, proselytization, a conviction that what you stand for is the ultimate truth. Everybody else's truth is questionable. And that is what I would relate to the first part of my remarks, that when I asked for a blurb for a book, a Western scholar, a strategic scholar who has worked in important governmental positions, said, I cannot give you an endorsement for this book because you're talking about, I said, what is objectionable? And the person said, you're talking about India's rise. And I said, because I'm talking of India's rise and its strategic autonomy, its ability to say no, the India that can say no, you think that's not correct. Because you are still steeped in that privileged global structure where you believe that not only should that global structure, which has not been reformed so far, should continue, but that even the agenda setting should continue in the same manner, which is heavily weighted in favor of the West. So we are in a complex world where we'll have to push our case and be ready to take some hard decisions.
We'll take two more questions.
We can't avoid the RKC.
Yes.
Even Mayur out there. So. Actually, the wiser thing would be for me to keep my answers short.
I promise to keep my question short. I'll keep my question short. In the foreseeable future, can you see the emergence of an organization like what perhaps the UN used to be, with almost worldwide participation, whose decision cannot be refused by a country?
Short answer is no. And a slightly longer answer would be that the world has tried all this before. After the end of the First World War, there was an effort made to create a structure that would provide lasting peace and security. And so you had the Treaty of Versailles, signed after the First World War. it turned out to be a failure. The following year in 1920, an effort was made to set up the League of Nations, which was the first attempt to create this kind of worldwide body of equals. Remember that the League of Nations did not propose a veto power for anybody. So it was meant to be a group which would have countries as equals. But what happened to the League of Nations? Firstly, the United States of America, which by 1920 was one of the world's most dominant, it was in fact the world's biggest economy even then, was not supporting the League of Nations. And its inability to satisfy the post-World War I grievances of countries like Japan and Germany led to their further remilitarization or militarization. At least in the case of Germany, it was remilitarization. Japan, World War I was on the side of the Allies. It was only later that it was on the part of the Axis powers. And so you had the League of Nations die a slow and unlamented death. By the time 1945, the United Nations came up. Within a year after that, unseen, unlamented, unheard of, the League of Nations sank without a trace in 1946, never to be heard of since then. So I think, given this structure where there's a privileged power structure with veto power, the global community is never going to be able to restructure it without some cataclysmic occurrences. So I am a firm believer that global orders and privileged power does not change or reform acting out of the heart, acting out of the goodness of the heart. It takes wars, it takes conflict, it takes fundamental contradictions to create a level playing field. From those, unfortunate events may arise some structure like that. But since power is distributed unequally around the world, at a practical level, no structure can give you kind of equal power around the world.
If we don't give veto power, but obviously just like with the indices in the stock market, we give leverage according to their market cap and things like that, something like that.
So there is an existing structure that is attempting to do it from time to time. And its name is the United Nations General Assembly. A General Assembly in which you have 193 members. But remember that any decision that the UNGA takes is essentially non-binding. And there are many decisions of the UNGA where member states may take decisions away from the UN Security Council, away from the Conference on Disarmament, which discusses issues of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament in Geneva. There also, out of frustration, people bring these issues to the UN General Assembly. You are aware that a couple of years ago, the General Assembly agreed on a treaty banning nuclear weapons. But does that in effect ban nuclear weapons? No. The UNGA can express a sentiment, a sense of the House, but it cannot enforce that. The enforcing mechanism, there's only one, and that's the United Nations Security Council. And the diminished powers in that council will also never give up that power. I mean, truth to tell, there are economies there that are not only less than that of India, but I can point out to another economy without any kind of denigration of that country, whose GDP is less than half of that of India. But do you have 6,000 nuclear weapons? No, you don't. Are you a declared privileged veto-wielding power of the UN Security Council? No. So you don't have an equal voice.
We'll take
Yes.
I have only one
Mr.
question.
Nath there and Mr. Mayur.
yes.
Sujan, I think, it's fantastic that is it that we see ourselves as a pole star more than the way the global powers across the world see us?
So I think without self-perception, ambition and confidence, you are never going to achieve anything. I think Swami Vivekananda had also said that, you first need to believe in yourself. No, it's not about ourselves. I think it's a realistic assessment of our growing profile, of the centrality of what India brings to the table today in terms of its potential economic power, potential riding on performance of late, and also the kind of values-based future that we are capable of offering as a third choice between binary choices that are polarizing the world. So I don't see any remarkable problem there.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, very short. Thanks a lot for the writing this book. Every time you write a book and there's a program in AMA, it allows me to come to Ahmedabad. So good.
Don't tell me that you came all the way from Delhi.
I did.
You did?
And sorry, my flight got delayed. So.
Domo arigato. He is a very fluent Japanese speaker, Mr. Mayur Shah.
So lovely book, sir, especially the part 4.
Please appreciate the cover also. I designed it.
Indeed. So I reread it so many times. It gave a lot of answer. And this is a hypothetical question. The Quad or the AUKUS or all the system that we have in place, especially in this Indo-Pacific arena. Tomorrow, hypothetically, if there is some economic interest of India and Japan, which is counter to economic interest of Australia and America, and considering there is a South China Sea, there is a East China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, all being controlled by China, what do you think then the scenario will play out? And I'm specifically talking about the green hydrogen versus the blue hydrogen in that context. Thank you.
I can only say that I don't see any potential for there being any major contradictions between the economic objectives that India and Japan might have as compared to the objectives that others may have in the region. I mean, ultimately, what is it that we seek? From Japan, we seek technologies, we seek their participation in our infrastructure projects, and I think that is something that does not contradict any other impulse in the region. There is a larger impulse in the region that is emphasizing the requirement of almost $1 trillion worth of infrastructure in Asia alone over the next few years. And Japan is, in India, playing a very small part of that. So I don't see any fundamental contradictions there. And these are, even the East China Sea and the South China Sea, however contested, still remain what we call the open maritime domains, through which a great deal of shipping, trade passes, energy, sea lines of communication. And no one can block that without damaging themselves, because China also depends on the same free and open sea lines of communication. So does Japan, so does Korea, so does Australia. And Mandata Singh also. Mandata Singh also.
Thank you, sir. So having an unstable partner in our borders, like recently the Bangladesh and the Sri Lanka previously, so how our policy for the growth, providing the security and simultaneously growth can be achieved in before the next decade, sir?
Security participation is episodic. In Sri Lanka's case, we conducted, what was it, Operation Cactus. Was it Operation Cactus? Way back in the, no, I'm talking about the peacekeeping mission that we sent, the IPKF mission. Pavan Vijay, is that Prithviraj Singh? Yeah, please. So thank you. So Cactus was in the Maldives. Was it the para drop? Yeah. So anyhow, the Operation Pavan Vijay in Sri Lanka is episodic. It was not a desire for India to manage the security of Sri Lanka. So we have to respect their sovereignty and territorial integrity. And the moment we felt that the job was done, we, in any case, had pulled out of there. As far as Bangladesh is concerned, you are aware that we played a very major role in 1971 in the birth of Bangladesh. But so I think that's something that is entirely dependent on an invitation from the host government, and you carry that out as per the comfort level of the partner. It is on the economic partnership that we should have greater emphasis. And that is where we are trying to do a lot for our neighbors. Through the neighborhood first policy, we also have a certain amount of non-reciprocal relationship. We are not seeking 100% reciprocity from any of our smaller neighbors. And we should keep it up. And I think we obviously need not get involved in the domestic political outcomes. It is for the people of these nations to decide. So I would put it at that way, that, you know, a neutral approach to the political processes, whatever is thrown up there, we have to deal with the choice made by those people. Whenever security requirement is there, to the extent we can, we should help, without once again taking sides if it involves any internal polarization within that country.
આદરણીય શ્રી સુજાનભાઈ, આપને હું કોઈ પ્રશ્ન પૂછવા માગતો નથી, કેમ કે પર્યાપ્ત જવાબો આપે દીધા છે. ત્યારે રાજકોટ મહાનગરના રાજકુમાર કોલેજ રાજકોટ અને રાષ્ટ્રના રત્ન સમાન આદરણીય શ્રી સુજાનભાઈ ચિનોયના સક્ષમ કલમમાંથી અવતરેલા ગ્રંથ ઇન્ડિયાઝ ટ્યુમલ્ટ, ઇન્ડિયા એઝ અ પોલસ્ટાર, આ પુસ્તકના વિમોચન અંતર્ગત આ સર્જકશ્રીને, આદરણીય શ્રી સુજનભાઈને હું અંતરના ઊંડાણથી અભિનંદન પાઠવું છું. અમારા ઘનિષ્ઠ સંબંધો આદરણીય શ્રી સુજાનભાઈ સાથે રહ્યા છે, અને પેઢીઓના સંબંધો. શ્રી સુજાનભાઈના દાદા શ્રી ચિનોય સાહેબ એ રાજકોટ રાજ્યના દિવાન હતા. એ ચિનોય રોડ, ચિનોય બંગલો, જે હેરિટેજ બંગલો છે જ્યાં પોતે બિરાજમાન હોય છે જ્યારે રાજકોટ પધારે છે ત્યારે, અને વ્યક્તિગત રીતે અવારનવાર જ્યારે અમારી મુલાકાતો થતી હોય છે ત્યારે મેં અનુભવાયું છે કે કોઈ પણ પ્રકારની વિકટતમ પરિસ્થિતિની અંદર તત્કાલ ઉકેલ લાવવા માટે એક નૂતન પર્થનું નિર્માણ કરીને નૂતન સ્વરૂપે સુયોગ્ય પુરુષાર્થ કરવાનું બીજું નામ એ આદરણીય સુજાનભાઈ છે. આજે રાજકુમાર કોલેજના ઇન્સ્ટિટ્યુશનમાં અભ્યાસ ગ્રહણ કરીને, એ અભ્યાસનું આવિષ્કરણ કરીને આજે વૈશ્વિક ફલક ઉપર એક મહત્ત્વ અને મહાત્મ્ય ભૂમિકા ભજવી શકે તો એ આદરણીય સુજાનભાઈ છે. આજે એક વહીવટકર્તાના એક હાથમાં જ્યારે કલમ ધારણ થાય ત્યારે એમની સર્જન સિદ્ધિથી એક અનેરી સુવાસ જ્યારે પ્રસરે છે, ત્યારે જ્યારે શાસ્ત્રલક્ષી ચિંતન હોય, ઉત્સવલક્ષી વિચારણા હોય, કોઈ સમસ્યાલક્ષી ચર્ચા હોય કે જીવનદર્શી લક્ષી અભિગમ હોય, ત્યારે હકારાત્મક નિર્ણય શક્તિ અને કોઈ પણ પરિસ્થિતિને નિભાવવાની પૂર્ણ તૈયારી સાથે રાષ્ટ્રને સમર્પિત અને અપેક્ષા રહિત આ પરિવાર એ સ્વથી ઉપર ઉઠીને સમષ્ટિ સુધી પોતાના એ માધ્યમથી એક અનેરી જ્યારે સેવા કરી રહી છે, ત્યારે એમને હું આજે નતમસ્તક વંદન કરું છું. આ પરિવાર જે છે, જે એક દેશને માટે સમર્પિત છે, કે જેના માટે આપણે એમને આખો સંઘર્ષ, એન્ડ વોટ અ જર્ની that we have been able to see, that from Rajkumar College, from a scholar to an able statesman, and representing India in different forums as ambassadors to different countries, and then conspicuously occupying presently as the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, to writing enticing and enriching books, including today's India's Tumult, India as a Polestar. It speaks of a sense of observation, analysis, inference, his grasp and reception, which is par excellence. It leads me to say that he's like someone who has two books in his pocket, one to read, one to write in. He reads the events and writes that impact meaningfully, meticulously, and impeccably. It is when someone says that I want to read a book and it hasn't been written, then you must write it. Shri Sujanbai has done a service to the nation and its inhabitants and citizens by writing this book. History is not the past, but the map of a past, which is drawn at a point of view to be useful for the modern traveler. We can think about the future in a better manner, knowing the history of the past. And Sujanbai has proved today that history is not a burden on the memory, but it is an illumination of the soul. The generation which ignores history, has no past and no future. But by analyzing and understanding history, the determined spirits are fired by the unquenchable faith in their mission to protect and serve the motherland can alter the course of the history. આજે સુજનભાઈ આપ અહીંયા પધાર્યા છો. આજે આપે જે રીતે એક ઇન્સાઇટફુલ જે આપના જે પણ કન્ટેન્ટ્સ ઓફ ધ બુક ને એક અર્થ જે આપણે અહીંયા જે રજૂ કર્યો છે, અમે બધાને એક મોકો મળ્યો છે એનું આવિષ્કરણ કરવા માટેનો. આપને અંતઃકરણથી ફરીથી આપને અભિનંદન પાઠવીને હું એટલું જ કહીશ કે આ આદરણીય શ્રી સુજનભાઈ જે સ્થાયી ભાવ અને આત્મરસના વ્યક્તિ વિશેષ કે જે આપણા એક ભાઈ તરીકે, આપણા એક પરિવારના સદસ્ય તરીકે આજે ઉચ્ચતમ આવા લક્ષ્યાંકો, સીમા ચિહ્નો જ્યારે એ પ્રાપ્ત કરે છે ત્યારે અમારા બધાની પ્રસન્નતા અને રાજીપો વ્યક્ત કરીને આપને ખૂબ ખૂબ અભિનંદન પાઠવું છું.
Thank you. I think very well articulated and spoken from the heart, Mandata CG Jadeja. Thank you very much. It was very well said. With this, we end the program. I call Yogesh Bhai to give the vote of thanks.
Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, Mr. Sawan Godiawala, Rajiv Gandhi ji, Thakur Sahib Mandata Singh ji, my colleagues in the ORA, Amit Shukla, Punjawala Bapu, distinguished guests, fellow Arcasians, ladies and gentlemen. As we draw this memorable evening to a close, I stand before you with a heart full of gratitude. Tonight, we are not only celebrated the launch of a remarkable book, but also honored one of our own, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, a distinguished RKC alumnus who continues to make us proud. First and foremost, I extend our deepest appreciation to Ahmedabad Management Association for hosting us in this wonderful venue. Your support has been instrumental in making this event a resounding success. A special thank you to Mr. Sawan Godiawala, President AMA, for his warm welcome address and that set the perfect tone for our gathering. I must commend Mr. Amit Shukla, Secretary ORA, for his eloquent introduction of Ambassador Chinoy. Your words painted a vivid picture of our esteemed alumnus' journey and his achievements. Our heartfelt thanks to Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, Managing Director, Hester Biosciences, for leading an engaging and insightful discussion with Ambassador Chinoy about his book. Your questions and perspectives brought out the depth and importance of the themes explored in the book, making it a memorable conversation for all of us. Behind the scenes, we have had key members whose efforts were invaluable. Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, I must also thank you for all ensuring our guests' comfortable stay here in Ahmedabad. And last but not the least, for managing an excellent evening for us, Punjawala Bapu, for managing our program this evening and being the MC, which was greatly appreciated. Lastly, a big thank you to you, Ambassador Chinoy, for not only giving us an exceptional book, but also being there here with us tonight and sharing your invaluable thoughts. Your work continues to inspire us and elevate the legacy of Rajkumar College. In closing, I want to thank each one of you for being here tonight. Your presence and enthusiasm has made this book launch truly special. To Ambassador Chinoy, congratulations once again on your on your literary achievement. You continue to inspire all of us. As we leave here tonight, let's carry forward the spirit of curiosity, excellence, and service that Ambassador Chinoy's books embodies, values that our alma mater, RKC, has always stood for. Thank you all for having this wonderful evening with us.